Ocheretko. Thank you very much from Arzinger that we're here today. That you could talk for hours as well, but you put together the basics, which are important to understand for our Austrian companies who want to participate. What are the main issues? What is really important to understand? So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I understand that some of you already have your experience of working with public procurement entities, and some of you might be somewhat afraid to participate in public tenders, and I'd like to show that, well, actually there is nothing to be afraid of. So here's some figures from the official Procurement system, and I know that there are over 36,000 public purchasers. So I'm sure that among these purchasers you would be able to find a perfect partner for your project. So the estimated value of all the tenders announced already in 2020, so only for 3 quarters, for 10 months, is 27.08 billion euro. So it's rather a lot of money to spend. And while there are some low-value tenders, there are also some really expensive tenders, multi-billion, multi-million tenders, which may be interested for foreign investors. And what's also interesting, there is an average only 2.3 competitors per bid. So why won't you be the third competitor, and why not participate in tender and win it? So Ukrainian public procurements are conducted through online Prozora system. It's the official single state procurement system, and there are a lot of technical issues about this, but I'd like to stop on some of the basic things you would need to know. So first of all, under Ukrainian law, there is no discrimination of foreign bidders. Both Ukrainian and local and foreign companies are entitled to participate in Ukrainian tenders equally. So there are no simplifications for Ukrainian companies. There are no simplifications for companies. Just try to participate and win. As this procurement system is conducted, placed fully electronically, there is a direct communication channel, online communication channel with all the purchaser, single windows for submitting all the documents, so you would not need to bother with all this paperwork, I mean, like printing out, signing hard copies. You would need to submit everything online. And even the appeal to the appeal authority, the Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine, or as you will see it in other slides, the AMCU, is also conducted fully electronically. Of course, you would be able to participate in person in the hearings, but submitting all the documents is really simplified, so you would not need to know all the addresses of all the bodies. You would not need to go to the post office and send any of the documents. You would just need to submit everything online. On the other hand, there is this issue that everyone sees everything. It's the cornerstone. It's the basic principle of Ukrainian Prozora system, and Ukrainian Prozora stands for transparent. So everyone sees everything. So any documents you may upload to the Prozora system, any questions you may ask the purchasing entities, any answers you receive will be seen by everyone. So either it's you or your competitors, or even just regular publics who may wish to review the particular tender and decide, well, I'd like to see, let's say, the way some companies or some public procurement entity deals with its potential bidders. So even before you decide to participate in some tenders, you can analyze your potential purchasers' behavior, and you can build up the strategy of working with this company. So this is just a more political slide about international recognition of this Prozora system, because it was a huge reform a couple of years ago, about five years ago, when Prozora system was launched. Earlier, the Ukrainian tenders were all in paper, and it was much more complicated, and no transparency was ensured. But Prozora system was developed, and it received a lot of recognition, not only in Ukraine but worldwide, and many countries are actually trying to duplicate this system in their legislation and in their practice. So it's a really good practice. And so when it comes to the procurement itself, I would not stop on all the types of procurements which are possible under Ukrainian law, because it would take hours. But once the tender is announced, you would see the procedure under which it's going. And depending on the type of procedure which has been selected by the procurement entity, you would just know how to act further. So depending on the procedure, there are different deadlines, there are different requirements for, let's say, the deadlines for appeal, the deadlines for submitting documents, etc. And what's also important when it comes about so-called European open bidding, which is over 133,000 euro for goods and services and 5 million for works. The publication in English is mandatory, and there is a pre-qualification of bidders. So basically, at first you submit your documents, the procuring entity is reviewing them, and if you are compliant with the requirements, then you are entitled to bid. In Ukrainian open bidding, the one which is below this threshold, at first you submit your document, then you place your bids, and then the Ukrainian procurement entity would then analyze your documents started from the lowest price. What's important to understand is that not all of the procurements conducted in Ukraine are conducted through the ProZorro system. So it's a general rule that most of them are conducted through the ProZorro system. However, Ukrainian law provides for some exceptions. Let's say, for instance, if the tender is funded from external sources, such as, let's say, EBRD funded tenders, then such tenders would be conducted under the rules of the particular organization which has provided a certain loan. As you are probably aware, a lot of infrastructure tenders are actually conducted under the EBRD or other financial institutions rules. So it's nice to know that you would need to analyze not only ProZorro system but also official websites of the institutions. I would not stop paying much attention to the common issues from the purchaser side. I'd like to say that all my presentation will be shared with you, and you would be able to revise it, ask me any questions in writing if you'd like to. My contacts are also at the last slide. But what is the common issue is that both purchasers and the participants make mistakes. And while there are a lot of mistakes from the purchaser side, not all of them are intended. So even if you see some kind of discriminatory conditions, or if you feel like tender conditions are drafted for a specific supplier, or you have been disqualified without due reasons, it doesn't mean that the purchaser has had any bad intention in this. However, in any case, you are entitled to appeal any of these decisions to the Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine. And if you have sufficient grounds to appeal, then the Anti-Monopoly Committee may order to the purchaser to amend tender terms, to remove disqualification, to cancel disqualification, to remove discriminatory qualification criteria, or to amend these tender conditions to provide for more competition. So it's important to remember that you have a right to ensure your rights, actually. And what are the most common issues from the participant side is that sometimes, unfortunately, the participants do not read the tender documentations carefully, and even if tender documentation is not drafted in any discriminatory way, it's really clear. Sometimes participants are just missing some important information, and let's say tender documentation requires you to submit contract with all the annexes, and you only submit the contract itself without supporting documents. Or the company is missing deadlines actually for this submitting of the documents, because Procurement system actually has its deadlines set not within days, full days, but sometimes even within hours. So let's say you understand that the company understands that the deadline for submission is, let's say, November 7th, and actually the system says that the deadline is not just November 7th, but November 7th, 10 a.m. So you must be very attentive to these particular details. One of the most common issues, especially for the foreign companies, is the failure to present the correct bank guarantee. Usually the purchasing entities are requesting the particular type of the guarantees for specific wording, and in some cases foreign banks just refuse to issue the guarantees issued stating that it must be compliant with Ukrainian law. And it's obvious because of course foreign bank would not know Ukrainian legislation. It just cannot write that, okay, this guarantee is issued under Ukrainian law. So in this case, you might consider requesting the procuring entity to amend the requirements so that there is no discrimination for foreign companies. Also, sometimes companies collude. And while some do it intentionally, mostly, there are cases when this so-called collusion is conducted unintentionally. Let's say there are companies, local Ukrainian company of the group and the other company abroad of the same group, and they both participate in the same tender, and then given that they have the same ownership structure or similar and they are connected, they would be disqualified. And more than that, they would be banned from participation in tenders for 3 years. So when deciding which entity of your group participates, be very specific and make sure that there are no connected participants. Also, appealing on incorrect grounds is also an issue, because there are specific deadlines for appealing tender documentation, and there are deadlines for appealing against the decisions of the purchasing entities. And so let's imagine the following situation. The company has submitted its tender offer and has been disqualified because it failed, let's say, to provide the bank guarantee once again with a reference to Ukrainian legislation. And then you try to appeal your disqualification and say, okay, anti-monopoly committee, we could not have provided this tender guarantee with reference to Ukrainian legislation as we are not Ukrainian resident. And then even though it may be right, the anti-monopoly committee would decide that you should have appealed not against your disqualification now, but you should have appealed before against the discriminatory condition of the standard documentation. So it's a really common example. And also, there is an abuse of right to appeal, which is a quite common issue. It used to be a quite common issue earlier because the value of the price for the appeal was rather low. But now it's not so common issue because the price for appeal depends on the value of the tender, and sometimes it may be up to around 5,000 euros. So it's not so common, but it happens sometimes. So it's just something you should know.
And what if you win the appeal? Do you get the money back?
Yeah, that's actually my next slide. Yeah, so when it comes to appeal, there are basically two bodies to which you can appeal. First is the Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine, and second is the court. So the Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine is the most basic body, is actually the key appeal body of Ukraine in respect of tender procedures. And so you should appeal to the Anti-Monopoly of Ukraine when you see that there are discriminatory provisions of tender documentations or any other kind of violation in these tender documents, or in respect of procedure. Let's say you believe that the purchasing entity should have used European, so-called European procedure, and it used a Ukrainian procedure, then you can appeal it to. Or the decisions of the purchasers. So let's say selection of tender procedure, the disqualification of you, disqualification of other bidders, failure to disqualify other bidders, etc. So there are specific timelines for each type of the appeal. I will not stop on this, you have to understand it. And how much? It depends on the value of the tender itself and on the ground. Generally, it's from 2,000 hryvnias to 170,000 hryvnias, so it's around up to 5,000 euros now. And so if the appeal is even partially successful, the cost of appeal would be returned. So it's a good thing to know, because earlier there were no such rules that the cost of appeal would return. However, the costs were lower before. And when it comes to the court appeal, first the thing that you can appeal to the court is these decisions of the anti-monopoly committee itself, and also the concluded contract. So once the tender procedure has been finalized, once there is a contract, there is no more appeal to the anti-monopoly committee, but you would need to go to the court. Yeah. So just a brief slide of the anti-monopoly committee commissions in process. There are currently 2 commissions, and they are just swamped with all these appeal cases, because there are hundreds and thousands of them. Earlier there was only 1 commission, but then they have increased the number. And I'd say almost last but not least slide is my pro tips for you as the participants. So first of all, I encourage you to participate in pre-tender consultations with the purchasing entities. So earlier, there were no such provisions in law that clearly allowed for pre-tender consultations, even though it was not prohibited. Some companies and some public entities were just afraid to conduct such consultation, because they have thought that it's some kind of sign of collusion or corruption. No, but it's not. As long as conducted clearly, transparently, as long as the purchasers are announcing such kinds of pre-tender consultation. So if you understand that there is such consultation, please don't hesitate to ask any questions, to provide your comments, to, let's say, draft tender documents, etc. Also, please check all tender documentation before submitting the documents, because what I see quite often is that companies check only those parts of documents which are required for the participant, but usually, always there is another part of the tender documents which is required for the winner. So the company wins tender, and then it understands that it just cannot provide some kind of the document that has been requested from the winner. Let's say the purchasing entity requests you to the winner to provide the charter of the company, but you being non-resident do not have such document under your legislation at the charter. Let's say it's a common example, unfortunately, and in this case, it's quite possible that you would not be able to sign the contract even though you have won the tender, and moreover, if there is a tender guarantee, you may potentially even lose this amount. Also, do not hesitate to ask purchasers all the questions you have in respect of the tender documents. So there is an online system of asking questions, and they have a strict deadline of 3 days to answer all the questions you have asked. But there are also deadlines for asking the questions to each particular tender. So please mind all the deadlines, submit all the questions, and the purchaser is obliged to answer. Also, it's the most important for the foreigners. Please double check all the translations and have a local representative speaking and reading Ukrainian, because sometimes there, let's say, from practical perspective, we had a case when the public entity required contract guarantee for the foreign companies required contract guarantee from Ukrainian Ocheretko, because it was the bank of this public entity, and the translator for our client, it actually translated Ocheretbank as Sberbank, because it has a similar in Ukrainian Oshad is in Russian Sber, and well, there was this problem with translation, and so our client, before consulting with us, requested country guarantee from Sberbank instead of Oshad. So it's really important to make sure that the translation is correct. Timely appeal to the AMCU, it's the same advice I have already given to you. Also, tender offer equals tender documentation. So it is I'd say also the basic principle, just like everyone says everything, but tender offer equals tender documentation. So if you provide any additional documents not requested by the purchasing entity, you would not be disqualified, but you provide additional information to your potential competitors, to the market, to anyone. So just stick to the point. Just give all the documents that are required, and do not give any other documents that are not requested. Also, be prepared to justify your price, because from this year, there is such mechanism as abnormally low price in Ukraine. And so if you provide abnormally low price, and it's calculated under formulas, and you would see it automatically in Prozor system that you have provided abnormally low price, and if you win with this price, then you would need to provide justification, because if you do not provide, then you would be disqualified once again. So there are no clear rules, there are no limitations in respect of justification, so you can basically just issue the letter and say that we are willing to provide some discounts, we are willing to, we would like to enter Ukrainian markets, etc. So we are trying to provide as good offer as possible, but just be prepared to justify. Also, there is an important amendment which also came in effect this year. There are the procurement entity would give you 24 hours for amending documents, but not all of them, only some of them, only those that confirm the right of signature of tender offer and the contract, and those that confirm your compliance with qualification criteria. So if you have made some mistakes in the documents, you would have additional time to amend them. However, it's only 24 hours, and it's not one business day, it's really 24 hours. So for instance, if the purchasing entity uploaded request to amend, let's say at 8 p.m. on Friday, you have time until 8 p.m. on Saturday to upload. So my personal recommendation is just to try to upload the documents perfect from the very beginning, not to need to worry about this 24 hours. Also, it corresponds with my previous advice in respect of checking all tender documentation. Before submitting the documents, prepare the documents which are requested from the winner beforehand, because in some cases, for instance, the public procurement entities request the documents that confirm that there are no grounds to disqualify you based on some crime committed by the signatory, or that information about the company is not included in the corruption offense register, which is currently not working, but in any case there is this norm in Ukrainian public procurement law. And sometimes it may take time, especially during the coronavirus crisis, to receive all the necessary certificates. So just prepare beforehand. Even if you do not win, it's not that much time and not that much cost to prepare the documents. Then it would be painful to lose the contracts only because you missed the deadline for submitting the documents. And also, I'd like to say it's like the most pro tips. It's check your competitors as if you were the purchaser, because you would be able to see all the documents your competitors upload to the Prozor system. And if you feel like your competitors are are not compliant with the tender requirements, just do not hesitate to appeal against their qualification. But the same goes about your own documents. So please check your own documents, not even as if you were the purchasing entity, because sometimes they try to close their eyes on some minor mistakes, etc. But check your own documents as if you were your competitor, because they will check your documents. So basically, that's all for the legal and practical point of view. And at the end are only two cases, recent success stories. This particular tender is I have actually personally supported the company in this tender. It's a recent tender which ended on September 19th. And this was a foreign company which had never before participated in any Ukrainian tenders, and it was their first time, and they didn't know all the procedures. However,
and you supported them from the very beginning on?
Yes. We have supported them. They have drafted all the documents by themselves. However, we have provided them the guidance, and we have explained them the basics of working with Prozora. We have explained them basics of working with the MCU, etc. And so they were able to participate, and actually from the first time they participated, they won in this huge tender, which the estimated value was around $10 million. However, there was a strong competition, so they decreased, their final offer was around $4 million. So there was 6 million savings for the public entity, but it was the case, and other competitors were also, if I'm not mistaken, except for one company, there were 7 competitors, or five or seven competitors. All of them were foreigners, and they did it, and they were competing, and well, you see the results. And currently, they are supplying these products to the Ukrainian hospitals. It's the medical products against oncology. So it was a nice and important project. And the other project, we have not supported it, but it's just a huge project showing $400 million tender for road buildings. The foreign company has participated, several foreign companies have participated, and the foreign company has won in this particular tender. And obviously the topic of this tender is more closer for you than actually the healthcare sector, but in any case. So you can see from the
actually our next speaker, they also participated in that.
Perfect. Yeah, and so what you see, what we see here, that it's really important and it's possible for foreign companies to participate and to enter Ukrainian market through tenders, because it's just not that hard, and it has good effect on the business.
Very briefly introduce ourselves. Consulenten is an engineering consulting company working in 9 technical sectors with building and structures, transport, mobility, environment, construction, project management, and energy sector. Energy efficiency and renewable sector is our key area since years in Ukraine, and also internationally has grown into a separate company, Teil Clean Energy Solutions, which is also represented with you in the room with Andreas. So we support, in general, we work throughout the project cycle with the project development, feasibility studies, design, supervisions, variety of services. We work globally with, we have projects in more than 100 countries in the world, from Australia to Canada, and some 600 colleagues in the group. And in Ukraine, we have been working since 2006, actually the first project since end of 90s, but actively we had a project office since 2006 and registered the company in 2013. With approximately, in the Kiev office, we're now 16 employees until recently. working, I would say, 80 to 90% in the energy efficiency renewable sector. And now also we can boast being present in the transport sector. So how did we land in this transport infrastructure sector? I have to say this was not a new process for us. We have made many attempts to get into also internationally financed projects, but managed by the procurement process is managed by Ukrainian entities. Unfortunately, unsuccessful, even though for us it's with qualifications and experience in the region, which would excellently fit, we were simply not coming on the shortlist for many also political reasons. Nevertheless, we did participate in some internationally financed projects in traffic management, e-ticketing, public transport projects in Lviv and Kryvyi Rih. We did some smaller assignments with the road, monitoring of quality of road repairs in the Kiev region shortly after revolution, and assessment of technical supervision project, which was last year. And finally, what I guess made a big change for us is this need to find new companies to create the competition also among international players and under the Great Construction Program, which we have all heard now for. So finally, in June, on the 1st of June, there was announcement of this big tender with a very complicated name, but in short, this is a supervision for a Zaporizhzhia bridge. We call it Zaporizhzhia Bridge Project, which was tendered with the maximum value of 3.2 million euros, excluding VAT. Currently, it would be 2.7 million. So this is a lesson learned. Number one, currency exchange matters. Since we applied in June with the currency exchange of 1 to 28, today is 1 to 33, we have already a significant change in the budget. So this was the max budget for the supervision. And the first thing for me is this deadlines. When such a scale of a tender is announced, expecting also maybe new and international players to come, 3 weeks time is simply crazy. So in our case, we had to, of course, make a political internal decision. Do we want to go for it or not? The deadline was extremely tight, even though, yes, it was a little bit extended eventually in the end, and to fulfill requirements. And we had to decide that we needed a new legal structure. And of course, to find the team who would do it, because as I said, we have not so extensively worked in the transport sector before. So the first decision had to be that we need a new legal structure. We created an IC infrastructure in a legal form of consortium established by a Ukrainian IC Consulenten LLC and an Austrian IC Consulenten GmbH, Civil Technica GmbH. And of course, this done in the quarantine with no available director who would pick up such a non-easy thing, with a lot of paperwork, which we have to first analyze and manage that it's delivered in time with the notaries, translations, apostilles, and our first tender documentation version was approximately 1,600 pages. And all this, as Yevgeniya earlier mentioned, has to be properly translated, because if there is a word coming up that causes misunderstanding, you can easily be disqualified by a client in the end. The team requirement, on the local team requirement, was 16 engineers with the specialized CC3 license for Technadzor, the Ukrainian license, which you had to confirm that you have them employed. No CVs required, which is very much more common to us, being used to international finance projects, where you select the people by CV and not by the name and the certificate only. But to find and employ these 16 engineers was already also a process in the short time frames like this. Laboratory was one of the requirements, which of course are very few in Ukraine, but they're fairly fit, so they're used to participating in the tenders, and there is no competition clause that they cannot go in more than one tender, which was less of a problem. So I would say here with the papers and the team was challenging, and the new legal structure, for us it meant to understand how to set this up, how to prepare all the documents for the new legal entity and still deliver them on time. So the backward calculation was quite demanding. One of the craziest, I'm sorry to say, silliest requirements for me was the confirmation of the material base. We call it material base in Ukrainian, which means as a company, so for example, in Austria, we have turnovers of approximately 35 million euros. And generally as a bidder, we have to confirm that we have, I don't know, computers, cars, available for the Ukrainian project. So for us, of course, it was easier to do it with the Ukrainian legal entity, but you know, you are putting, you are confirming that you have 10 computers, for example, and for each of them you have to, a confirmation is only valid if you show the invoice, then ACT, which is our famous Ukrainian acceptance statements, and nakladnaya, which I don't even know what would be the international equivalent for this. And can you imagine, for each piece of measurement equipment for computers, if you want to show the telephones or the cars, for each of these things you have to show the at least the 3 pieces of paper, which to me is crazy in this regard. Then it is a big tender. To our surprise, we had to confirm only 1 equivalent reference, specifically for the technical supervision, which, you know, for the company that's used to working with FIDIC engineering contracts, with international contracts, with international supervision contracts, it's also there was a legal bargain whether Ukrainian Technadzor would qualify for a standard supervision in our case in Kosovo, we showed the reference. Then you have to find the positive recommendation letter, and I was thinking, is like, how do we imagine the EU Commission, EBRD, or any other IFI delivering you a positive recommendation letter for a project we did 5 years ago? You know, you can't even find these people. Needless to say, find them in a week and ask them to sign something for you. This also in the international procurement. There are already easier ways to handle this. You get the reference descriptions. If needed, you can show the confirming contract. And in our case, also the contract had 6 annexes, which were completely useless to confirm the experience, but we had to translate all this and prove. Our tender was not, there was no, let's say, no prior technical evaluation. So in our case, we went for the auction first, then the bidder with the lowest price was first going through the technical evaluation. And in our case, we landed second in the, sorry, I think we were even third in the list in terms of pricing, but the previous 2 bidders have been disqualified for a variety of formality reasons. Some of the reasons Yevgeniya mentioned. So there was an issue with translation or apostille documents or something like this. And the bank guarantee, you know, this story can qualify for a separate book, but this I find completely also insane. Something that takes in our Austrian office 20 minutes to get for any amount, or almost for any amount reasonable for us. Takes 20 minutes to arrange in Austria. For Ukraine, it's, for whatever reason, they needed it's needed to make a process in a way that takes 1 week of paperwork and effort, and still risk of not getting it in time. And in our case, you know, for a new legal entity, even for an old one, when you are creating a new legal entity, you cannot bring the money into the account except for the charter capital. So we had to plan in the charter capital in the amount that would cover the tender guarantee and the performance guarantee if we would be awarded the contract, because otherwise in between there is so little time that you simply cannot arrange this. And the bank guarantee only in our case counted as cash, so you had to have this cash on the account, and the only way to bring in this cash is to transfer it as a charter capital. And all this, of course, in the tight timeline. There was no other bank product available and doable in this time that would allow us not to freeze this amount of money on the account in Ukraine. In hryvnia, so we had to transfer the money into hryvnia, and then comes the currency risks and all these things. One of the big, I think, mentality-wise or acceptance-wise for our company was, of course, a difficulty to play with this number, because normally in the international projects, the technical supervision services and the FIDIC specifically would range between 5 to 7% in the international contracts. This is normal amount to ensure proper quality supervision. In Ukraine, by law, and this was in our case a fully national procurement, it was not an international tender, even though the amount was quite high, but they classified it like a works tender, not services. So there is a possibility to do technical supervision services, but to put it under the works contract. So for us, it was purely Ukrainian national tender with no English documents available, no possibility to submit our bid in English. And normally then in this case, also limited to this 1.5% of technical supervision services in Ukraine out of the construction amount. So this is what we went into the price, and this was our final bidding final auction price, and the contract amount of a little bit less than 8%. So we accepted this in general. Let's see how this works. And yes, and the big happy day of this tender in 30 days done, winner, and a few lessons learned. So partners and good lawyers. I have to say, if we also did not have good lawyers that not only supported us with the project, but also drafted many things. And I guess also if ITSE was not present on the Ukrainian market for so long, we wouldn't manage. The local office in Kiev worked honestly 3-4 people full time for 4 to 6 weeks. This is my estimate for this. This would include lawyers, of course, probably one full-time lawyer for 4 weeks to do this registration and document preparation and verification. Quite demanding. So the resources of the people is very important. Speed in all tasks and aspects, and partners and subcontractors and authorities. With subcontractor, we had to sign a contract, almost a binding contract, of bringing them in for the 20% of volume amount for to participate in this bid, which, you know, when you have no time to negotiate, to discuss, you are signing a contract blindly only to qualify. This is, of course, for the international companies, is very difficult to accept, and was also for us quite difficult. The investment, 30,000 to 50,000 euros. This is like investment that is gone. This is only lawyers and efforts and translations and all these things. This excludes the cost for the bank guarantees and the money that you have to freeze there for. In our case, it's now for 4 years. The performance guarantee. Currency risk, incredible. I started with this, how much money is already gone, how much in euro equivalent is already gone. And honestly, I have to say that there are no insurance products. We have asked, but the insurance products that are being offered, they are costing so much money that the economics of such contracts simply do not work. So this is room for improvement. Somehow this has to be done. Otherwise, Ukraine will not be able to attract too many international companies to perform such things. On a positive side, of course, once it is done, it's done. And I have to say, once you go through this process once, you make your lessons learned, but we were able then to still test a few tenders shortly afterwards, smaller scale. But this experience can be reused for similar types of projects. And of course, in that case, it's much easier afterwards. And political influence. This is the biggest concern, I think, for us Ukrainians here, especially knowing that it's a public tender, knowing how much attention it will have from both public and authorities, knowing how it's difficult to report in terms of accountancy, taxation, costs, and these Ukrainian reporting requirements are in certain cases extremely difficult to fulfill for international companies. Like Yevgeniya had this, like, confirm your cost. How can I confirm a cost of an international expert's daily fee? This is simply does not fit into the Ukrainian reality. And of course, the challenge to do it right and not having to explain to our tax authority or security forces afterwards why we did certain things we did is still bothering us, but we're doing the best we can to make everything in a proper and transparent way, which unfortunately in Ukrainian reality is simply sometimes impossible to do, because they will always find something that has been done wrong. So this we're still waiting to experience, and hopefully we will manage together with the clients. And of course, the big thing, this is the big bridge. And we call it the bridge, which is actually not true, because there is, in fact, this is 4 bridges. This is the big one of them. There is another one that is connecting the island, so goes from one bank to another through the island. Extremely important infrastructure and social project for the city, because they also have to put their main bridge onto the reconstruction, which would be a transport collapse. So we have 2 parallel bridges. The pylon is 166 meters. And the big thing about it that there were no bridges done on this scale since Ukraine's independence. And the construction for this bridge started many years ago, at least 10 years ago. There were already efforts. They made certain first efforts, and now this is a big revival of the project, which, of course, for us as a company, we are extremely proud to be part of this landmark and unique project in our recent modern infrastructure history. So coming back to Gabriela's question, yes, it's doable, challenging, but with a little bit of effort and a good team and partners on site, very doable. And Prozora still has a lot of room for improvement, but I think together by working through this experience, there is a lot of wish on the Ukrainian government side to improve the system, and we're happily sharing our feedback of how it can be reasonably simplified to attract even more companies. With this, I thank you very much for attention and happy to take questions if any.